Welcome back. President Trump spent part of his weekend pushing back on Twitter at a press conference and through his spokespeople on the damning report by The Atlantic that he called soldiers who died in battle losers and suckers. Despite the president's denials, key details of the story, which is based on anonymous sources close to President Trump, appear to have been confirmed by multiple news outlets. The author of the piece says he expects there's more to come, which means President Trump will continue to be distracted by this story, as well as perhaps this one, former Trump fixer Michael Cohen's new book, which the White House has denounced as fan fiction. Here's just a part of what Cohen said in an exclusive interview with my colleague Lester Holt.
I described Mr. Trump as a cult leader, and I was in this cult. And while I was in the cult, I was really refusing to acknowledge that the actions that I was performing for my boss were morally wrong.
Well, joining me now is someone with insight into how the president thinks, former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci. And Anthony, it was a tweet of yours that sort of got me thinking about this larger concept that I think this entire sort of this part of this campaign against Trump is having an impact. And that is when you said, hey, there's more to come. I think it was something like that you tweeted. My apologies if I don't have it exactly.
Well, yeah, more surprises this week. You know, Michael's going to be delivering more on Rachel Maddow tonight. And then you've got more stuff coming from the American military.
Right. And I want to get at this. This is all coming from people who at one time were close to the president, like yourself, who have decided this is the best way to sound the alarm. What I find interesting is how the president chases every one of these cars.
Well, he has to, because if he doesn't chase every one of these cars and discredit these people and use his bully pulpit to do that, then he's going to, have this onslaught. Remember, Chuck, the president has to do two things. He has to discredit every single person that's saying this about him. And then he also has to strike fear in the people that are still in the administration that know how dangerous he is, and they are fearful of coming out the way people like Miles Taylor, myself, or Michael Cohen is speaking out. So it's a combination of deterrence and intimidation. He's been doing it for 40 or 50 years. Some of us don't care about it, but some people are very afraid of him. I mean, when you're getting tweeted at by the president of the United States, the first time you go white as a ghost, the second time you sort of enjoy it. I mean, it's a weird process, Chuck. You've had it happen to you. I've had it happen to me.
Well, no, I mean, it certainly made it, I think, much more difficult to have more candid public conversations. I think people are afraid of saying anything about the president sometimes for fear of him and his Twitter army. I am curious, are you at all concerned that there will be a pylon aspect of this and that somehow he's able to successfully turn this into a victimization campaign against him?
Well, that's obviously what he's going to try to do. He's going to say, look at this, it's a manipulated hit job on me. But I think very differently. I think when we get into October, and some of us will be campaigning in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and up in Wisconsin, just to simply explain to people the Surgeon General's warning label, what he's actually really like, his lack of managerial skills, his impetuosity, his hatred of the American military, which is on full-on display now. They're fighting very, very forcefully to rebut that because they know how damaging that is. And they've all heard him say it. Chuck, I was on the campaign plane with him and mentioned to him that I went to Afghanistan and Iraq on troop support missions. And he looked at me like I was crazy. Why would I do that? And of course, it took him a long time to get himself out to those places as well. So listen, there's going to be an onslaught. I think we owe it to the American people to tell them the truth. And then the American people have to make a decision if they want 4 more years of this sort of nonsense, or do they want to clean this up? And then we can begin the process of rebuilding the Republican Party.
One of the things you tweeted last week that when the president refused to answer the question about whether he asked John Kelly himself to personally refute the Atlantic story, you seem to say, you said, could there be any more proof from Trump himself about how true this story is based on his refusal to answer that question?
100%. And Jeff asked the right question. So General Kelly was with you. He was with you at Robert Kelly's gravesite. He was with you in France. Why don't you have him release a statement and have him say what he saw and thought and what he heard. Of course, the president's not going to do that because the president knows the absolute truth of what's going on. He knows the truth of what he said. He's talked to all of us in that way. If you really think he had bone spurs, Chuck, during the Vietnam War, then you're part of the cult, basically. Of course he didn't have those. So listen, he'll never bring that up with John Kelly. I know that. But I'll tell you right now, if he does, and that gives General Kelly the license to release a statement, I think it's a knockout punch, frankly. But there will be other knockout punches between here and the election, Chuck. People need to know what he's really like. Listen, I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't just about the battle of ideas, Chuck. This is a systemic threat to the institutions of our democracy, and we got to speak up about it.
So what would you say to folks who say, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to trust everything Michael Cohen says? He seems, he's been convicted of lying to Congress, and he seemed to be a part of this until he wasn't, and maybe he's just angry he didn't get a job that he wanted in the White House. What would you tell people of why they should take Michael Cohen's allegations seriously?
Well, because I think Michael Cohen has been through the ringer, and I think Michael Cohen has made a fortified, frankly, courageous decision to speak out. I think at this point, if you just think about the potential damage to him, the threat to him and his family, what happened with him and the Justice Department in terms of putting him back in jail, I think it's a very courageous act on his part. And I would look at it that way as opposed to anything else.
Hey, very quickly, since you used to be a guy and you're still a guy that many political committees asked to write big fat checks to, Donald Trump running low on campaign cash. He's supposedly thinking about putting his own money in. There's a lot of skepticism by many of us that he'd actually write his own check. But you know this as a donor. How harder is it for you to write a check to somebody's campaign committee if you know they're as wealthy as you are?
Well, listen, I made that case for him in 2016. I think the real question, though, is what happened to the $200+ million that went into that LLC, and who ended up getting it? And so you missed one of my tweets. I'm asking Ronna Romney McDaniel, where's the money, Ronna? And so I think it's sort of a joke at this point. We know that they're grifting off the campaign. We know the president will never write a personal check into that campaign, and we know that they spent gajillions of dollars in his hotels to fortify him. So it's a sickening thing, Chuck. I don't like it at all. I haven't written a lot of checks since 2016 as a result of this. They have really exposed the dark side of this sort of fundraising.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point on all the Trump properties that seem to be profiting off of the campaign and the Republican Party as a whole. Anthony Scaramucci, it's always good to get your perspective on. Thank you, sir.
Hey,
appreciate it.
Good to be here.
A few quick programming notes. Lester Holt's interview with Michael Cohen airs tonight on the NBC Nightly News. That's at 6:30 on NBC. Then Rachel Maddow, speaks live with Cohen here on MSNBC at 9 p.m.